Today, I'm here in the cottage garden to give perhaps one of my most important pieces of advice that I've given on the entire channel, and that is about planting perennials in autumn. Now, when people think of starting things up in the garden and preparing for the year ahead, they generally think the best time is to plant in spring. And don't get me wrong, spring is a good time to plant your perennials. After all, the ground is moist and there's plenty of warmth and sunlight to help the plants grow. It's just a great time of the year for things to spring up, no pun intended. But what a lot of people don't realize is that autumn is even better. Autumn, fall, if you're in America, is the absolute best time to be planting perennials. And it's also a great time to be planting things if you want them to come up nice and early in spring and you don't want to have to wait or perhaps even miss that season of blooming because you planted them too late. So here in the month of September, almost October at this point, when we're very late into, you know, I wanted to say we're late into summer, but now we're properly in autumn. We're going to be taking a look at some of the best things to plant, as well as some general advice for planting in autumn. By the way, I'm trying to hit 4,000 subscribers. I'd love to have you here on the channel, so if you like gardening content, definitely consider subscribing. It'd be great to have you here. So why is autumn actually better for planting things like perennials than spring is? Like I said, most people generally seem to assume that spring is the absolute best time, but I really don't think it is. I think that autumn is the best. Now, the main reason is we're actually giving our plants a much bigger head start on the year ahead. So, for example, the majority of things you see in this border, especially over this section here, which are very nicely established perennials, they were planted last autumn around this time. And as you can see, some of them are already quite big. I mean, this, for example, we've got a taller one here, but let's take a look at a ground cover one that is filled out really nicely. All of this has been done in 1 year. And that would not be the case if I'd planted these in spring. I'm sure some of them would still be decent, but they wouldn't be nearly as established as they are. Planting in autumn gives your garden a massive head start for the upcoming year, because effectively what they'll do is they'll actually start to grow some roots underground and make some progress in autumn as you plant them, then sort of go dormant in winter, but then really spring to life again in spring. So you've got a whole extra season of root growth and progression that you wouldn't get if you're planting things in spring. And even in winter, I believe plants still grow a little bit. Like, it's not the case that they just completely do nothing. They're still doing something under the ground, especially perennials and trees and shrubs. So it is highly recommended that you plant things in autumn if you really want to see them go crazy the following year. I planted so many things in this border as well in autumn, and they went amazing. And comparing them to the things that I planted in spring, they're a lot bigger. The things that I planted in spring definitely didn't grow nearly as much as they could have. And of course, next year when we get to the next gardening season, they will grow even bigger because it'll be their second year really. But with the perennials that I planted in autumn, they'll be even bigger than that. So that's why I highly recommend planting things in autumn. Autumn is a great time for many reasons to plant things because, for a start, the ground is nice and moist. I know a lot of people hate that word, but it's very apt here. The ground is wet. It generally rains a lot in autumn, especially if you're in the northern hemisphere, or here in England, I'm sure you get a lot of rain. So it really is a fantastic time because you don't have to be watering them all the time. That's why it's much better than planting in summer, because whilst things do grow in summer, they dry out very quickly, so you have to keep on top of watering them constantly, which can definitely be an annoyance. So by planting them in autumn, the earth will do most of the job for you. You might have to water them a little bit, especially if they're new. I always say, keep on top of newly planted perennials and make sure they are watered, but you won't have to water them nearly as much, which is really, really good. So that's one reason. Another reason is the ground is still nice and warm. People assume that when we get to autumn and it starts getting really cold, that, gardening is done. It's not. The earth is still really warm underneath here. That's why so many of my perennials in the garden are still growing. We haven't had a frost yet, So, the ground is really, really warm. And even the first frosts of the year aren't going to really do anything. It's going to be those later ones in January and such. So, effectively, effectively, that's another great reason to be planting in autumn because the ground will still be nice and warm and it will be wet. Now, the following does apply to spring, of course, although the ground might not be as warm in spring because you're just coming off of winter. So, I generally feel like going from autumn is better in that regard because obviously you've just come off of summer. So, it's a lot better, in my opinion, in terms of the ground being warm, and perennials, of course, will like that. Obviously, if you've got really hardy ones, it doesn't matter too much, but it'll still help them along, which is important. Also, autumn is just a great time in general to move perennials around. I've done a video recently on dividing and moving perennials. It's incredibly easy to do. You just dig them up with your, fork in the garden and you can split them apart. Of course, you can also just do this just to move them around and they'll be fine. Because again, unlike in summer, you won't have to keep on top of watering them all the time. You will be able to sort of let them be and do their thing, which is really good. So that's definitely one reason that autumn is so great for doing those sort of jobs around the garden, not only planting but moving stuff. But what about the perennials that we can plant in very early sort of autumn and have for very early spring or just throughout spring in general so that they get a really nice head start? Well, now I'm going to be showing you some of the best perennials that you should be planting early on to get those early blooms. Geums are a really big one. This one is called Geum Maitai, and as you can see, it's got no flowers on it at the moment. That's because this thing flowers so early, and unfortunately, this particular variety does really only flower sort of once in my experience, even with deadheading. But it's so pretty, and yeah, it's a great early flowering one. I'll give you a bit of a better example that we can actually still see in flower because of how crazy it is. This one is Geum Totally Tangerine, which has one flower still hanging on. Bless this plant. It's nearly October and it's still flowering. This thing is an incredibly early flowerer. GM Totally Tangerine will flower from, let's say, maybe like late March all the way through until now, October time, which is crazy. Not many plants do that. And, you keep deadheading it and it'll keep on coming back and rewarding you because it's actually a sterile plant. It doesn't produce seeds, so it just keeps on going. And yeah, this is one that you can definitely plant in autumn. You can plant this right now if you want to see those very early blooms. This plant is a really good size now, and that is hugely in thanks to planting it in autumn. It wouldn't be nearly as big as it is if I had planted it in early spring. And I might have missed out on those blooms actually, at least a good few months of it. I would have probably still got some, but I would have definitely missed out on the really early blooms. So that's a huge reason to plant it so early in autumn or just any time throughout autumn, really, but just important to plant it in autumn to get those blooms. Ajuga is another one that I showed you earlier. A lot of people don't really think of this as a spring flowering plant. It can flower actually a few times throughout the year, but Ajuga is a great ground cover plant that'll really fill out things nicely. It's a sort of more like alpine type plant, but mine has done fine in my quite rich soil, which is good. And yeah, again, if you want to see those nice sort of blue flowers, which are really unusual, very pretty, then definitely plant this thing early in autumn or just throughout autumn, and you will get yourself those blooms next spring. So definitely a fantastic one to be planting early. Aquilegia is another one. Now, mine never flowered this year, which I have no idea why. If anyone has any ideas why, let me know. Maybe it's going to flower next year. I know some things don't flower on their first year, and this was a very little plant. But it's another good example of a type of plant that you should definitely put in spring. This thing actually likes to self-seed like crazy, so don't be too surprised if you see lots of these actually pop up in spring time through seeding, or even autumn. I think you can start to see them. It really depends on sort of when the seeds have set themselves. So you can get a lot of free plants from this one, but more importantly, yeah, it's great to plant in autumn because you're really going to see those effects next spring. It'll hopefully flower. Mine didn't this year, so maybe it's not the best example, but the actual growth of the plant has been amazing, to be honest with you. So I can't complain about that at all. It's definitely grown really nicely, and hopefully that means next spring we'll see some really good results. Brunera Jack Frost, which somehow is in flower now. I don't know why this is in flower because this is a very, very early flowering spring plant. My only guess as to why this thing might be in flower is because it thinks it's spring because the weather has been so weird here in the United Kingdom this year. That's all I can guess, to be honest with you. Maybe that's completely off base, but that's what I'm assuming. Either way, this beautiful foliage plant, which looks like it has been munched by slugs, that's not good. Where did these slugs come from? We had a very slug light year, which I'm grateful for, but it looks like they've come back with a vengeance and they've been munching on it, which is annoying. But yeah, this is a really, really early flowering one. It'll flower like late February through till maybe like April sort of time with these beautiful dainty blue flowers. A lot of people think this is a forget me not. It's not. It is its own thing. But yeah, Bruneras, one definitely to plant in autumn. Again, this self seeds like crazy. It'll go mad and it'll fill your garden with self seeded plants. So keep that in mind. But also, that's a good thing in my opinion. It does really, really well. So I definitely think this is one to plant in very early spring if you want some. No, sorry. This is one definitely to plant in autumn for early spring. So I just want to clarify that. All of these are to be planted in autumn. It's very easy to misspeak when you're kind of saying a lot of the same words again and again, but hopefully you get what I mean. Definitely plant all of these plants, including this one, in autumn for blooms in spring. I also find the same with geraniums, hardy geraniums. This one I think is called Mavis Thompson. I also have Dreamland and Roseanne and various others. Some of them are a bit later than others, but ones like this and also Dreamland come up really early. Sort of, I want to say maybe like May time, which is still spring, even though it kind of feels more like summer. It's still spring. And yeah, again, if you plant these in autumn, you'll see some really great results for them early on in sort of the year. You'll see a lot of growth anyways, which is fantastic regardless. So definitely worth planting them in autumn. And here's another Brunera as well. This one looks a bit better. It's not been completely munched. Also, you probably notice I've got a lot of weeding to do. That's another thing about autumn that you're going to see a lot of self-seeding, a lot of weeding because it's very wet. They love this sort of condition. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep on top of, but that doesn't take away from how good of a season it is to be doing important jobs around your garden, like planting things, collecting seeds, moving perennials. There's so much you can do in autumn. Never ever let anyone tell you that gardening ends in summer. If you want it to, that's fine. But don't let someone try and tell you that, okay, summer's over, you've got to get inside and stop with the garden. No, that's not true. Gardening continues now. To be honest with you, you can do something with the garden almost every month of the year if you really want to. Probably not everyone wants to, which is completely fine. But autumn is a month that, in my opinion, if you really want your garden to look great in the future, don't miss out on it. It's really important. Unfortunately, a lot of the other plants that I kind of want to show off are dead because of just the time of the year it is at this point. All the spring ones that I'd love to show you are kind of gone. Let me think of a few more examples. I know a lot of people say that you should plant some of the biennials in autumn. So hollyhocks, foxgloves, that sort of thing, delphiniums, you definitely want to plant them in autumn because they then hopefully will flower on the next year, which should be that autumn. And they're typically plants where when you grow them from seed, they don't flower on their first year. So if you want to get them to flower the following spring sort of time, then definitely plant them in autumn. So any biennials you can think of like that, foxgloves, hollyhocks, delphiniums, lupins as well. They're all great things to sort of plant in autumn, and you'll see some really fantastic results. I think it is hard sometimes to be motivated in autumn to do things around the garden just because obviously a lot of things are starting to die off and not look so nice. And the weather has really taken a turn here in the UK. It's been so rainy, but it's also gotten cold very quickly, which I think has been a shock to some of these plants. But at the same time, it's exciting because it really allows you to think forward. It allows you to think about the year that is coming, and that's so exciting to me. I've made a lot of progress in the garden this year, and I've already been moving a lot of stuff around in preparation. So autumn is just such a fantastic time to really get excited for the upcoming growing season. It feels like it's far away because we just finished with summer, but honestly, it'll come by really quickly and you'll be shocked by some of the progress on your plants. Now, I did mention a lot of things which obviously flower early that you should be planting, but in general, I just want to say I plant all of my perennials for the most part in autumn. It doesn't matter whether they're an early flower or not, I will plant them in autumn because, again, all of the reasons that I listed. The ground is moist, it's still a bit warm, plants will have an extended growing season because they'll get a little sort of head start. I do all of that in autumn. So honestly, whether it's a late flowering perennial, an early flowering perennial, I highly recommend planting in autumn. You will be so surprised by the results. I can't recommend it enough. I think there is a lot of people who sort of say spring just because spring is traditionally known as the month where things get going in the garden and you sort of start up again. And don't get me wrong, it's totally valid. If you prefer to plant in spring, that's just what you do, and you've seen good results, then all the power to you. I think that's fantastic. But for me, I will always, always be planting in autumn. I just think it's the absolute best time. So let me know in the comment section, what are some of the plants that you are going to be planting this autumn? What are some changes you're making around the garden? I always love to hear your ideas in the comment section, so don't be shy. If you've been sort of watching the videos but not commenting, I would love to hear from you if you want to. It's so great to interact with the gardening community, especially this time of the year when we're all planning things for the next year. So definitely make sure to drop a comment if that's something you want to do. Yeah, the garden is still looking good. Hopefully from this little sort of walk around that I've done whilst I've been showing things off, you've gotten an idea of what's going on in my garden at the moment. I did recently do a tour if you missed that, so that will give you a better idea. But yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of things have gone to seed, a lot of things are starting to kind of die off now, but some things still look amazing and haven't really been touched. Like these verbenas, perfection. Absolutely no faults or flaws whatsoever this late on. So, yeah, there's really a lot of things you can do to make your garden look good all year round. I do have some videos on things to plant sort of, at certain times of the year and such to get interest throughout the year. And as we continue through autumn, I'm going to have plenty more videos like this. But even in winter, I'm going to have videos on things for winter interest. So definitely stay tuned. Lots of gardening content to come. So I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you next time.